Hey there, CJ Math students, and welcome to today's notes. First thing you want to do is grab your notebook that you got in the mail. If you don't have it yet, grab a piece of lined paper. Pause the video while you go get that. Now, once you have that, go ahead and put your first and last name up on the top line. Put the date over here all the way to the right. Say Mr. Haggerty Math Notes. And AMDG, which stands for the greater glory of God. It's a Latin phrase, right? Everything we do hopefully is to get closer to God, right? To become our best self. So today, right in the middle, you are going to write out fractions, decimals, and percents. So the top two lines were filled up with that. The next line, fractions, decimals, and percents. Whatever is on my paper is on your paper. Our main idea, go ahead and write main idea. You can pause the video if you need to. And write out for today, numbers can be written in 3 different ways and still be equal. This is called equivalency. So equivalency is when I can write a number in a different way and it still be equal to something. This is beautiful, right? This is the language of numbers. You can write stuff in a whole bunch of different ways and mean the same thing. Just like I can say something in English and it mean the same thing when I say it in Spanish. That's how numbers work. And the 3 different ways, we have fractions, we have decimals, and we have percents. So go ahead and write definitions, write fractions, decimals, and percents. And now we're going to actually go ahead and write out those definitions. So a fraction represents a part of a whole, right? When you think about it, you have a part, which is your numerator, over your whole, which is your denominator, right? An example is 3 out of 5 people voted, 3/5, right? A decimal is a fraction whose denominator is 10. So if I had a fraction such as 9 out of 10 on a quiz, I can know that I got 0.90 or 0.9. When I write, you guys should also write. So the stuff that's typed out should be on your paper, and the stuff that I write should be on your paper. And lastly, percent means per 100. So again, it's like another fraction, but instead of being out of 10, it's out of 100, right? So 7% of the world goes to college, right? That's like saying 7 out of 100 people would go to college. And then if I wrote that as percent, 7%, right? That line right there basically means per, right? 7 per 100. That's how you can read a percent. So today, we are mainly going to focus on our halves and our fourths, and we're going to try and memorize them, and we're going to try and see them constantly when we're doing our quizzes, right? So if I have a circle here, and I have half of that circle shaded in, that fraction is 1 out of 2 pieces, right? 1 part per 2 pieces, 1/2. That decimal is 0.5 or 0.50, right? How do I get that? I could show you mathematically. I could prove it. I could take the denominator, 2, I could divide it into the numerator. Well, wait, 2 doesn't go into 1, so therefore I can go ahead and say decimal, 0, and 2 goes into the 10 5 times. I'll make that in red, 5 times. Subtract it, I got nothing left over. That's how 1/2 is 0.5. As a percent, 0.5 is 50%. You should know these things, right? If you get 50%, you got half of something correct, right? Now, notice in this circle, we have 2 out of 4. We have 2/4. 2 is half of 4, right? I could prove that by saying how many times does 4 go into 2? Well, I don't know. 4 can't go into 2, but 4 can definitely go into 20. If I had my decimal 0, it goes in there 5 times, right? So hence why 2/4 is the same thing as 1/2, and it's still the same thing as 0.5 or 0.50 if I wanted to say it. And it's the same thing as 50%, right? Those decimals, fractions are equivalent. What about this one? I got 4/8. Hopefully you recognize, wait, 4 is half of 8. Shouldn't that just be 0.5 and 50%? Absolutely, right? And again, you can prove it mathematically. Take the denominator 8, try and put it in the numerator. You'll notice you can't do it. So decimal, 0. How many times does 8 go into 40? Well, it goes in there 5 times again, right? You got nothing left over. And again, that's why it's 0.5. Again, you could say or 0.50 and 50%. Okay, so those are your halves. Your halves are always 1/2, 0.5, and 50%. Those are the equivalents, right? Now your fourths are a little bit different, right? You'll notice I have 1 out of 4. We call that a quarter, hence why a quarter in the money system is worth 25 cents. I could prove this mathematically by saying 4 goes into 1. Well, 4 can't go into 1. 4 can go into 10, though. 4 can go into 10, okay, how many times? 2 times. 8. I have 2 left over. Okay, what do? Oh, I add another 0 and drop it on down. 4 can go into 20 5 times. Hence, I've proven that it's 0.25. And as a percent, 25%. Here's 2/4. Wait a second. I know what 2/4 is. 2/4 should just be 0.50, right? Or 0.5. We just did that. And that's 50%. Hopefully you'll notice, wait a second, if this is 0.25 and this is 0.25, then this should also just be 0.25. Hence, if I put both of those together, 2/4 together, that's 50 cents, right? So what about 3/4? Right? I have 3 parts shaded, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. Well, if this and this is 50, add another 25, 3/4, that's worth 0.75, right? Or 75%. Now, I could prove it again mathematically by just saying how many times can 4 go into 3? Again, 4 can't go into 3. 4 can go into 30. You can go in there 7 times, which is 28. And there's 2 left over. Oh, I got to drop down another 0. And 4 can go into 25 times, which is how I get 0.75. Okay, so I can prove these things mathematically, but it's a lot easier if we just memorize them, right? And lastly, this whole, right? So I have 4 out of 4. Well, hopefully you recognize that that fraction, what is 4 divided by 4? It's just 1. Hence why that's the decimal is 1.00. And just pretend if you got 4 out of 4 questions correct on a quiz, you'd have 100%, right? And again, a way to prove this is to say, hey, if each one of these is 0.25, each one of them is a quarter, I just add all these up. 4 quarters gives me $1, 100 pennies, 100 cents, 100%. Right? You'll notice that you have this sheet right here, your math reference sheet. You can use it. At the top, it's got your wholes, it's got your halves, it's got your thirds, which we haven't covered today, but then it's also got your fourths, and you can kind of skip count, right? If this is 0.25, and then this is 0.25, you'll notice that 2/4 is 0.50, and 3/4 is 0.75. It just goes up by 0.25. The halves, they just go up by 0.5 every single time. So why is this important? Well, it's important because like the world revolves around these numbers, whether or not we see it. And a lot of time it is important because guess what? It decides what is and isn't equal in the world. So if we take a look at just money, for instance, which is often represented as percents or decimals, you'll notice that like, hey, the top 1% of people in the world, just this guy, he owns 43% of the wealth. Meanwhile, all these other people over here, the bottom 50, the bottom half of our country, right, owns less than 1%, right? That doesn't make sense. That doesn't seem fair, right? And we have to start understanding what these numbers mean so that if we understand them better, then we can go out into the world and make it more equitable and more fair for everybody. It makes sense that like, hey, if this guy's got a whole bunch of money, somehow that should get redistributed, right, over to these people that probably need it for food, for water, for housing, right? Because if they have that, they can be just as successful and happy in life too. This guy seems like he's got all the power because he's got all the money, right? So it's kind of about if we could divide up the country, like this guy would have all the country all by himself based on the money that he has, right? And that doesn't seem fair, right? So we'll be talking more about this specifically related to global rights being a global citizen and human rights. And the key point is to first get the skill down, right? First be able to translate between fractions, decimals, and percents so you actually know what they mean and what it means when I say, well, you get half of that and you guys got to split those up into, fourths. Or you get half of the money and you guys got to split it up into tenths, right? So we're going to figure out what that stuff means. Once you're done with this Edpuzzle, you're going to use the quizzes code that Mr. Haggerty has and do quizzes. Try and do it until you get a 100. So you're not done with quizzes until you get a 100. And then if you haven't already, I need you to make sure that you complete your ST Math. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Yesterday, you should have completed the intro in ST Math. Only 2 guys, Mr. Brantley and Mr. Anderson, completed that intro. They completed the intro and then they're on the game. Some of you guys started and logged on but never did it. Perhaps you logged on and it didn't save, but that's on you, right? So let me show you how to save. I'm going to pretend that I log in as Mr. Newman here. So when I continue and I log in, and by the way, if you don't have your password, just email Mr. Haggerty and he can get you that password. All right. You have to make sure that once you do this, you allow local data storage. First of all, this wasn't the quiz, but once you finish this, you will come to this bubble right here, percents, right? And what you need to do is once Gigi logs on, is you will have a pre-quiz to take. Right? You may not understand it. It's totally fine, right? But if you have that check mark there, great. What you need to make sure you do is click on the actual box and click on that first bubble to say, okay, I've done some stuff, right? To make sure that you've saved it, you hit back, 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 back. You're going to get to this page. You should get a red X. Hit the red X. Make sure you get a bubble that goes up and saves, all right? And that's it. So you've got the Edpuzzle to do. You should copy everything that was down in the video. Like you don't need to obviously copy that picture, but your paper should look like mine. You don't need to copy this table, but it is good to help and draw the pictures. And then you've got the quizzes to do. And if you didn't do the ST-Math, do the ST-Math. Questions, please email or text Mr. Haggerty. That's it.